Thank you, Chief Justice. That was a very kind introduction. Um, I want to salute you for supporting the principle of addressing the gender imbalance on the bench here. I think that, in fact, you're worse than Mauritania and Saudi Arabia for not having women on the bench. I want to thank the National Human Rights Commission of Northern Ireland. This is a long-delayed visit. That invitation was addressed to me when I was High Commissioner for Human Rights. I've retired now for 9 months. So if you hear me speaking too much about I, we, and so on, please remember it's former High Commissioner for Human Rights. I don't have the powers, but I'm still speaking out on issues. I feel particularly close to this body because we are all lawyers and judges. I was a lawyer myself for almost 30 years in South Africa, and it was such a struggle fighting cases in a courtroom where the judges took the position of applying the law positively as it stood. I once had to go to Zambia to see witnesses, and I was given a passport for 4 days. So we whipped in there and back, and one of the exiles I met gave me a record of Irish revolutionary songs, well, freedom and folk songs. It was so moving, especially the one on We Shall Overcome. So this was in early 1970s. And as a lawyer, then I had an opportunity to go to Robben Island prison to visit my own clients. And so tucked into another innocuous sleeve, this record got to them on the island as well. So I want to thank the Irish people for supporting us in our struggle. And I'm here also to salute the tremendous development that has taken place here and very gently point to areas that probably need more attention. I had not applied for the position of High Commissioner for Human Rights. In fact, I had to resign as a judge from the International Criminal Court to take up this appointment. So let me tell you what some others have said. Ambassadors said to me, it's very appropriate to have a judge as a High Commissioner for Human Rights, even though I'm not judging any longer, I'm an advocate and seeking changes and advances in the protection of human rights, however small. That was a big mind change for me from working as an attorney in South Africa, because we wanted all and immediately. So what the ambassador said to me is, what's good about you is that you are a judge and you listen. So taking the heed of the other person's point of view and presenting a balanced picture got us a long way to maintain the dialogue. The Secretary General also said to me, towards the close of my term, now I understand something about judges, and that is you stick to principles. It happened because the Iranian foreign minister had asked me repeatedly to visit Iran. And I said, well, I won't be wearing a headscarf. And he said, but that's a law of the land. Exactly like you have to drive on the right-hand side of the road. Everybody has to obey the law. And I said, it's a very law that I'm attacking. You change that law and then I would come. And so then he went to the Secretary General, who advised me to buy a designer French scarf, put it on my head, and go. And because Mary Robinson had covered her head, so had Louise Arbour and some ministers in the French Parliament who wore the designer scarves, apparently. And that's when I told him, this is about discrimination against women. This is about imposing a religion on me. My job is to uphold UN standards. So if I go and compromise, what am I doing to all the people who want to follow UN standards? So that's a little bit of my legal experience and judicial experience. I do think that there is room for many more judges to be working in the UN. But as you also know, it's dominated by politicians. Les and I arranged that I would speak for about 20 minutes, and then we can have our open dialogue, because I'm not certain, of course, what your areas of interest are and what you'd like me to address you on. So, as I said, I had no idea about the Office of the High Commissioner of Human Rights or the Human Rights Council in Geneva, because I was functioning in a courtroom. And so I thought I will explain some of the challenges that faced me when I first started. Plenty of advice, of course, from very many member states. One powerful country did not approve of my support for women's reproductive rights and wanted an assurance that I would not influence my office with this approach. I got a call from the Secretary General's chef de cabinet, who said they had given this assurance on my behalf, and so could I now just set it out in writing? They'll just keep it in a little drawer, they won't use it. And I, of course, declined, said there's no way I'm going to give you an undertaking that I won't introduce progressive ideas to the Human Rights Council. And so I went on to assert reproductive rights of women as a human right publicly, and I joined the UN Population Organization, UNFPA's campaign to educate and promote the right to reproductive health. And of course, I hope that the protection of women here in Ireland will extend to respecting the choice of women. There is a pushback on these particular rights in the UN right now. This happened at the CSW, the Center for the Committee on the Status of Women, which is an intergovernmental body. It happened at meetings of UN women chaired by the current president of Chile, who was the head of UN Women, and also at the People Are Afraid to hold a follow-up conference to the Beijing World Conference on Women, or the Cairo Population Conference, because civil society is afraid of losing the gains they achieved. So it's still a challenge then within the United Nations organizations, but particularly member states on this issue. I just raised that first to say that the High Commissioner for Human Rights had to deal with all human rights of all persons, and not select one or other or grade them as important. And when I began, I was also told by some state representatives not to name any states for criticism in my address before the UN Human Rights Council, General Assembly, and so on. And they said this was because it's an intrusion into state sovereignty, and I was interfering in the internal matters of a country. But I felt it was not possible to pinpoint violations of human rights or even gains in protection of human rights if I did not mention the country concerned. So I started off quietly by singling out a few countries where it was necessary to do so, and by the end of my term, I had included comments on about 54 countries, and it was accepted. It came from me and it was accepted. A few of the developed countries were surprised and objected to me shining the lens on their backyards, because they said I should be focusing on very serious issues, the killing of thousands of people in conflicts in other parts of the world, rather than asking them to ensure equal rights for groups such as the Roma, the Sinti, and the travelers. But as I said, all human rights are important, and they cannot be graded for importance. So as lawyers understand, you challenge an issue in court, you win or lose step by step. There you are. I covered the spectrum of states, because no country has a perfect human rights record. every country has issues that need to be addressed. I also found in the Human Rights Council that there was a skewed emphasis, also in the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights, a skewed emphasis on civil and political rights to the detriment of addressing economic, social, and cultural rights and the right to development. The right to development is explicitly stated in the mandate provided to the High Commissioner for Human Rights by the General Assembly resolution. And this complaint obviously was raised by many developing countries in the Human Rights Council and the General Assembly, and I thought it was a valid position, and I proceeded to rectify this. There was resistance to this initially from those who considered that economic rights and the right to development were not rights, but aspirations. Human rights protects both freedom from fear, civil and political rights, and freedom from want, economic, social, and cultural rights. That's in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So we then, over 6 years, have come a long way to pushing for the rights based on the Rio outcome and the post-2015 development agenda, and for the recognition of the right to food, the right to water, the right to health. So when I started in 2008, there was huge resistance to naming these as rights, including from my dear friend, the head of World Health Organization, who was too afraid to call it right to health. And by the time I left, she was giving me lectures on why health is a human right. Now, of course, I don't blame her. She was bound by the positions adopted by her board, the same member states who passed the entire spectrum of human rights laws and are parties to these covenants. So the right to water is very important, and the right to eradicate poverty is clearly of crucial concern. So I'm pleased that the South African Constitutional Court, based on the fact that we have an equality clause. I've spoken to many universities in the United States where students were very surprised when I informed them that they didn't have the right to equality in their constitution. They have right to equal opportunities, but not right to equality. So the South African Constitutional Court, relying on that, and also a provision in our constitution that where there's a gap, they can refer to international norms and standards. And despite the fact that South Africa is not a party to the Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, the South African Constitutional Court first spelled out the right to housing, and then proceeded with regard to AIDS medication, ordered the government to provide AIDS antiretroviral medication to AIDS sufferers. And this, in turn, also led to litigation, which opened up generic medicines, the manufacture of generic medicines, so important for developing states. So I truly respect and am in awe of the changes that courts of law can bring. So, Chief Justice, I listened very carefully to some of the cases that you underlined, and want to say that these are very, very good examples. And I lost my power as High Commissioner, but not my voice. So I will communicate both my court's decisions and the attempts you are making to deliver on economic and social rights. Now, a similar prohibition was asserted by states against me addressing the issue of homosexuality, LGBTI rights, and a strong group of states accused me of creating new rights and not adhering to internationally agreed rights. So congratulations to Ireland for the people of Ireland for adopting the referendum you have on same-sex marriage. Now, here again, our persistence led to the United Nations addressing the issue of violence and discrimination against LGBTI persons for the very first time. So 2 studies have been done, and the United Nations resolutions commissioned these worldwide studies against homophobia as a human rights violation. Now, combating impunity and strengthening accountability, the rule of law, and promoting democratic society underpins all the activities undertaken by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights in the exercise of this very unique mandate given to the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So the office continues to play a major role in supporting the development and monitoring of human rights norms and standards by the human rights mechanisms. By these, I mean the Human Rights Council, which has a procedure called Universal Periodic Review, the human rights record of every country, including Ireland, is reviewed by the other states, and they make recommendations. The High Commissioner provides a report on the human rights situation. NGOs participate, and national human rights commissions with A status can participate in these proceedings. It's webcast, it's public, and the whole goal is not just to criticize, but to help states and civil society implement these recommendations made by other states. And I was truly surprised that that was happening, that states voluntarily produce their human rights record to be scrutinized by others, and they accept many of the recommendations made to them. The other human rights mechanisms are the special procedures. These are about 50 or 55 independent experts, mainly academics, but they are lawyers as well, who have expertise in their area. They could be thematic issues such as eradicating poverty or torture or freedom of speech, or they could be country-specific, such as an expert mandate holder watching the situation in Iran, South Sudan, and North Korea. These individuals visit states, they produce reports, and they make recommendations as well. Now, my calls for accountability or referral by the Security Council to the International Criminal Court for investigation of suspected serious crimes met with resistance by some, mainly from the countries concerned. The Syrian ambassador called me a lunatic. The thing is, we do occupy the moral high ground when we assert these are the obligations that you undertook when you signed up to this convention. I was told I was exceeding my mandate, that it was a violation of state sovereignty and an interference in the internal affairs of a country, or that these were matters for political resolution, not human rights scrutiny. And this would be the reaction each time I encourage the Human Rights Council to hold urgent debates or special sessions on specific country situations, and these include the Israeli military operations in the occupied Palestinian territory in Gaza, the situation, the conflict in Syria, Libya, Sri Lanka, DPRK, and Eritrea. I should not forget to mention that my first and biggest challenge was to serve as secretariat for the review conference of the 2001 Durban World Conference on Racism and its outcome document, DDPA. Of course, 9/11 happened 2 days after that good document was adopted, but the conference itself was controversial. As you know, Colin Powell led the US delegate out, and Israel felt very hurt and angry at some of the anti-Semitic remarks that came from both the official representatives and from civil society organizations. But the interesting thing, which I picked up later, is that the foreign minister then of Israel wrote on his website that that conference and the outcome document, DDPA, was a success for Israel because it condemned anti-Semitism as well. And yet, for 8 years after that, the entire situation was changed by virulent propaganda saying that this Durban conference was against Israel. So when the review conference was held in Geneva, President Obama, who had newly taken office, announced that he was not participating in this conference, and 7 European states, including Australia, followed like a ratchet effect. They all withdrew from this conference, except Ireland. I must say, the Irish ambassador made a very profound statement on addressing racism, racial discrimination. So that was my biggest challenge, and I only realized that my predecessor did not stand for an extended term because of that conference. It was so highly political. The importance of such a conference, and one of its outcomes was that we held regional workshops in 5 regions of the United Nations to address the other pesky issue of defamation of religion constantly raised by Arab states. So we had to convince them that you can't defame a religion. It's individuals who may suffer defamation. And so in each region we had experts, including from the regions concerned, and they came up with an action plan on how to address incitement to racial or religious discrimination and related intolerances. Once again, a good document called the Rabat Plan of Action. This leads me to comment that in a situation such as in Northern Ireland, where you are still dealing with huge differences and divisions, it could be on religious or other grounds, how important it is to have a human rights-based approach where the rights of everyone are respected, the dignity of everyone is respected, and we address issues such as discrimination, violence, and related intolerance through national action plans. I had the privilege of seeing human rights education being taught at some schools. This is where it begins, where children are taught to undo these perceptions that have built up of prejudices and suspicion of the other. In the Rwanda tribunal where I sat as a judge, witnesses told us that hate propaganda against the Tutsi was spread over the radio and the journals, and spread like little drops of petrol all over the country until it caught fire. And this is what makes me say that discrimination, divisions must be addressed because they are alerts to serious conflicts and violence happening later. So these 2 schools I visited, one was a girls' school in Gaza, where the 8-year-olds demonstrated how they resolve disputes amongst themselves. They spoke about respecting each other's dignity, and a third person interviewing, getting these 2 quarreling students to talk. I saw such a demonstration on the island of Gori, once again a girls' school, where through art they were expressing the full spectrum of human rights as it appears in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Ireland is a very important member of the United Nations. Ireland can always be trusted to support human rights in the international fora, and the Irish government has provided huge support for the High Commissioner for Human Rights. And so it's my fervent wish that these would be translated locally to build a stable, harmonious society here in Ireland. Now, when I first addressed the Human Rights Council, I pledged to embark on an open-minded, frank, and reciprocally reinforcing interaction based on the premise that the credibility of human rights work depends on impartiality and commitment to truth, and no tolerance for double standards. And of course, this standard is familiar to you, quite unfamiliar in the halls of political discourse in the UN bodies. And I often felt if states adopted this approach of being impartial and devoted to protecting the human rights of people, instead of fervently adopting their national or regional positions and loyalty, if only they would hold their friends to the same standards as their foes, it would be very helpful. The international community can certainly benefit from such an approach in ensuring peace, security, development, and human rights by prioritizing human rights, by placing people at the center of their deliberations, whether it's climate change, environment, or development. So, regrettably, the international community remains unable to react consistently, strongly, and quickly to crises. And we now are going through information on our television screens daily of crises happening in many places, Iraq and ISIS, where ISIS offers no choice to individuals except to convert to Islam or be killed. They are selling little girls for $10 each in order to recruit young men to join them. So an appalling situation, but the UN is following the situation in the Syrian Arab Republic, Libya, Mali, Central African Republic, the occupied Palestinian territories, Ukraine, South Sudan, and Cote d'Ivoire. And so I, in turn, received many requests from the Security Council to brief them on the human rights situation in these countries. This was very welcome because previously they dealt with peace, security, and development without reference to human rights. And I felt this demonstrates the heightened recognition that human rights are fundamental to peace, security, and development. It is shocking beyond belief that war crimes and crimes against humanity have become commonplace and occur with complete impunity. So I was disappointed that the Security Council, by 13 votes in favor and 2 against, have been unable to reach agreement on any kind of action to ensure accountability in Syria. So in my final briefing to them, invited by them, I stated that by their failure to agree and act collectively in the face of horrendous violations, they were responsible for the deaths of thousands of people in Syria. Now, next year would be the 70th anniversary of the United Nations, and this is an opportunity for everyone to debate on UN reform, including its structure, including the veto powers held by 5 states, the need to be more effective and efficient, and also to put the people back into the United Nations. I think my time is about up now. I just wanted to mention some future challenges, which is obviously terrorism, but also the measures adopted in counter-terrorism. The UN has very clear rules on counter-terrorism. They cannot violate human rights in the process of attacking terrorism. And within and among states, there's acute income inequalities, failures of social and economic governance. So there is a fundamental need for more consistent application of human rights in the economic sphere. All people deserve accountable and democratic governance under the rule of law. In developed and developing countries alike, corruption undermines social justice and the right to participate, to contribute to and enjoy economic, social, and cultural rights. I have recently addressed many universities in South Africa, and they particularly asked me to speak about ethics in the public and private sphere because of the alarming incidents of corruption in government and business. It will also be necessary to step up our work to maintain the right to privacy in the face of governmental and corporate attempts to create a surveillance society via new technologies. And here the office prepared a report in response to a UN General Assembly resolution on the right to privacy in the digital era. So these are my conclusions, and I think these new and emerging issues will need to be addressed by all of us. So thank you, and I'll wait your questions and, of course, your comments. Thank you.